Hi, welcome to slide 6. Okay, let's talk about some of the theatrical conditions during the English Renaissance. In a good year, a theater season then could run for over 40 weeks, but the plague cut many seasons very short. During a typical theater season, a company would perform from 28 to 35 different plays, more than half of which would be brand new, and the rest would be revivals or continuations of plays from previous seasons. So you can imagine the amount of plays that were being written at this time. Some plays never made it past the first performance, so some were flops. And it was actually rare for any play to be performed more than a dozen times without having like new scenes added in, or new prologues or epilogues added. So plays were sometimes and often being like added to and revised while they were being performed, from night to night. Legally, every new play did have to be submitted to the Master of Revels, for licensing before it was allowed to perform. Passages that were thought to be morally or religiously or politically objectionable, had to be removed. But the Master of Revels and his committee were actually known for being kind of liberal about this. So, like, the law was there, but they didn't. They took out, like, I guess, the really objectionable stuff, but they did allow a bunch of some controversial stuff to stay in. Only about 10 to 20% of London's population were regular playgoers, so competition was pretty intense to gain audiences between the different playhouses. So there was a lot of advertising that went on. There were posters that were displayed. Sometimes there would be a procession through London, a little bit of a parade announcing a new play. And on the days when performances were going to be given, the theaters would fly flags from their roofs as a way of announcing that there would be a play that day. Audiences varied from theater to theater. Some theaters or playhouses' audiences had a very rowdy reputation, and other playhouses, their audiences had a more like refined reputation. But overall, audiences at that time behaved way more like we behave currently at like a sporting event versus the way that we behave in the theater nowadays. So there'd be a lot of yelling and cheering and sort of yelling at the characters, booing, whoa, why did you do that? Kind of stuff. So it was very like participatory audience. You could see a play in London on any given day of the week, but whenever weekly deaths from the plague reached 50 or above, the theaters would shut down. They would all be closed down whenever the weekly death toll from the plague was 50. In 1582, this shutdown happened for 18 months. In 1593, the theaters were shut down for 11 months because of plague deaths. In 1603, the theaters were shut down for 13 months. In 1636, they were shut down for 17 months. It's amazing to me that when I was researching for this course last fall, when I was kind of compiling all my research and putting this all together, I was just like, wow, this is so interesting. It's so interesting to share the fact that theaters were shut down during the plague, and can we even imagine? And it blows my mind that now, when I'm actually doing this lecture, we can all completely imagine it and can completely relate to it. We know now that all theater has been shut down indefinitely, and we don't know when it's going to come back. It's just mind-boggling that now we can actually relate to this piece of theater history. I hope it comes back soon. All right, let's talk about how the English Renaissance came to an end. So, civil war broke out in England in 1642. Charles I was king, and he was arguing with the British Parliament over how much power he had. He wanted to rule as an absolute monarch, so he wanted absolute power. And Parliament decided they weren't going to authorize any new taxes until he agreed to set limits on his power. And he refused, and then a civil war broke out. The war rekindled all that religious opposition to theater because there was a close association between theater and members of the royal family who had been really big advocates for theater. So when this war broke out, all those religious opposers to theater took it as their opportunity to like ramp up again, and say, you know, we're against the royalty, and see how the royalty's all in with the actors, so we're against them too. In 1642, because of all this civil war, Parliament used the chaotic state of the country as an excuse to close all the theaters for 5 years. And when that 5 years was over, the Puritans were in control of the government in England, and they decided to declare the closure of theaters to be permanent. So that's how one of the most brilliant and productive periods theater has ever known ended. And theater kind of takes a dip for a while and comes back during the Restoration period, which is actually where theater history too should start off. So here's the end of Theater History 1, the end of the Renaissance. And yeah, here we are. On the next slide, I've included 2 crash course videos on Shakespeare, just to give you a little bit more information on him. My original plans for this course were that we would study a Shakespeare play together, but I've actually decided to not include any reading or responding to a Shakespeare play, just because we're at the very end of the course now, and a lot of you are still getting caught up from our lives being so disrupted. So this week I'm just including this lecture and the note-taking form so that everyone can have a chance to breathe a bit and get caught up a bit before we talk about the final project. And that's all we'll have left now is the final. So I'll be posting that final by this coming Wednesday, May 6th, so that you'll have 12 days to work on it when it's due on the 18th of May. So the next slide with the 2 videos on Shakespeare are just more information on him. I know a lot of you, I'm assuming, studied Shakespeare in high school, so I know that you're not like, I'm sure you've all read at least one Shakespeare play and studied it and performed in some Shakespeare or worked tech on some Shakespeare. So I know that that's as great as he is, I know that's not an area that you're probably like completely not knowledgeable about. So I decided to cut it to give us all a break. So check out the videos on the next slide. Complete your note-taking form on the English Renaissance. And that's it for this week. I hope I see some of you in my virtual office hours so we can talk about how you're doing and how you're doing in this course and gear up